Good afternoon. I'm Terry Brooks, and we are so happy to have you joining this particular segment of Children's Advocacy Week. As you know, we have almost 24 events planned this week. This is not to offend any other event, but my colleagues will tell you this is the event that I've been geeked up about, and that's why I'm facilitating it. I have a hypothesis that the media plays such a crucial role in civic engagement, civil discourse, and that has such a direct bearing on how we're doing for Kentucky's kids. That what I wanted to do as part of Children's Advocacy Week is have a very in-depth discussion with three journalists who I have the greatest respect for, and have them really tackle our time together with two different lenses. One, and we're going to open with this, is a deep dive into what is happening and what is not happening in Frankfort. Then I have asked my good friend and famous journalist, Bill Goodman, who currently heads up the Kentucky Council for the Humanities, to handle the second part, which will really focus on a much more macro level about journalism in 2021. So joining us today, we have Scott Jennings. Scott was the founder and co-owner of RunSwitch. He worked in the Bush White House. He currently, I think, is on every cable channel and radio station in the universe, but specifically CNN and NPR. Scott, I know you got an incredibly busy schedule. We appreciate you being here so much. Lawrence Smith has been a journalist from Houston to Lexington, and we are so glad that he has landed in WDRB in Louisville. He is, I believe, an Eastern Kentucky colonel, and additionally has studied theology at the Southern Baptist Seminary. Lawrence, I always look forward, because your news broadcast is 10 o'clock and I'm still awake, and I always appreciate the coverage you give. And finally, joining us is Linda Blackford, who is the columnist and opinion writer for the Herald-Leader. I've got to do this because Linda knows that my favorite story of any journalist is probably 7 or 8 years ago. We had convened a summit on a snowy Saturday, which actually Bill Goodman was facilitating. It was when Kentucky had experienced a spate of child fatalities. And I vividly remember that the then secretary, who was about ready to resign, walked to the podium wearing her overcoat so she could leave, literally running from the podium as she talked about the issue. And my favorite vision of any journalist was Linda Blackford chasing her down the halls of the old Executive Inn. That is real shoe leather reporting. So Linda, we appreciate you being here, and I appreciate you out sprinting the secretary that particular afternoon.
Well, thanks. It's nice to be here.
Okay. So folks, I want to begin by asking, as I said, I want to kind of talk about the overriding narrative in Frankfort. And let me tell you what I've heard, and then I'd like you all to give your reflection and tell me where you think this sits. The clear big picture frame in Frankfort is around the General Assembly versus the governor. There's no question about that. And I've heard three hypotheses. One is that combative format is really a direct result of pandemic pervasiveness. One elected leader told me that it's just sort of this fatigue and frustration, and it's the pandemic. I've heard a very different hypothesis, frankly advanced by your fellow journalist Renee Shaw on Monday, that several elected leaders really were about institutional authority. She talked about that whether it was President Stivers or former Speaker Hoover, that those folks really talked about separation of power, and that they really saw this battle between Andy Beshear and the General Assembly as a test of institutional autonomy. The third is obviously that it's just pure politics, that the 2023 gubernatorial elections already started. That's what this is about. So I don't know. I don't know how to like sequence this. Let me just reverse it. Lawrence, I know, is going to offer analysis, which is different than commentary. But so let's start with the analysis, Lawrence. What, A, B, C, or D, you got your own theory or analysis on this?
To be honest, I think it's all the above. I think that tension between the General Assembly and the governor has always been there. But I think there are some things that make it even worse right now, or even more pronounced right now. One is you have, super duper majorities in both the House and Senate, and Republicans and a Democratic governor. That exacerbates it. You have the pandemic, which saw the governor exercise extraordinary power over a long period of time. That has exacerbated it. And then you have some positioning as well for the 2024 governor's race. So I think all of that is combining to make what you're seeing in Frankfurt now even more pronounced than it might normally have been. That combined with, I think since, I guess it was 2000 where the legislature was approved to meet once a year. It used to be once every 2 years. And I think that was part of this process of giving the legislature more authority and the governor less authority. It's now easy for the legislature to gather together. It used to be very hard. Communication is instant. All those things have combined, I think, to make this tension even more pronounced between who gets the power, who shares the power in Frankfurt.
Great. Linda?
Yeah, let's don't forget that there was this relationship, very adversarial relationship set up between Andy Beshear and when he was AG and the governor's office, when Bevin was governor, and there was a lot of challenging of these kinds of, the executive branch and the judicial branch. And I think we're continuing to see that. I agree that it's all of the above. And I think that the pandemic it's a stressor on everything. And clearly the legislature feels like they're going to rein him in. Given that it's very possible the next governor will be a Republican, I wonder how they think that's going to play out down the road. But I wanted to point out something, because I think we're here to talk about kids, right? And legislation to help kids. And yesterday was a fascinating tableau, if you will, because we had a report on why Kentucky, from the very same fatality board that you and I were just talking about, and why Kentucky is still #1 in the country for child abuse, which is just this horrific statistic that we kind of seem to gloss over. At the same time, a group of Democratic women legislators put out a slate of 21 bills to improve maternal health. And in the House and Senate, it was only about overriding the governor's vetoes. That shows a real, there are some different priorities going on that are very clear. And I hope that they will start to move beyond the power struggles and into more meaningful legislation that can help kids.
Yeah, great. Scott?
Yeah, thank you, Terry. And first, I just wanted to say I appreciate very much the Kentucky Youth Advocates. I appreciate you and the invitation. It's an honor to be in a box next to Bill Goodman and Linda and Lawrence, who I consider to be friends and esteemed colleagues. So thanks for this conversation. A lot has been tackled here, so I was making a few notes. I think, as was stated, tension between the governor and the General Assembly is not new, and I agree that the pandemic has certainly put it on blast. Remember, there was a lot of tension between Matt Bevin and the General Assembly, and they were all the same party. And so this is sort of thing, I think, over time, this idea that the legislature needs to essentially occupy the space that the Kentucky Constitution affords it. I do think legitimate questions have been raised about the extent under the current statutes of the governor's statutory authority to have emergencies that are open-ended and the power that gives one person. I think Republicans have expressed some questions about lack of oversight and his unwillingness to use the legislature and other constitutional officers, for that matter, as something of a sounding board or an oversight board for what he's doing. I think other things exacerbating it are the fact that he hasn't really taken a strong stance on opening the schools when the science, I mean, he's fond of saying we're listening to the science. Well, just before we logged on, the CDC director again said the preponderance of data is that the school should be open even before vaccinations of teachers occur. So I think that is driving a lot of this. I think Republicans are hearing from a lot of small business owners who feel like some of the emergency decisions were arbitrary. I do think, too, there is a serious hangover from the governor's decision to send the state police to the churches in the state early on in the pandemic. I really think I continue to hear that in the circles in which I run. I think, and by the way, I'm not, I don't think Andy Beshear's done everything right. I'm not one, though, who thinks we ought to be criticizing politicians for trying. I think early on in the pandemic, Democrats and Republicans were all earnestly trying to do the best they could with limited information. Now, as time has gone on, we have more, and I do think you're starting to see people go to their partisan corners. I think the governor has played to his base interests, and I think the Republicans have to some degree as well. But I think ultimately some of these questions about how much power and should one person have and how little oversight should they have, I think that's the core of it. So I know that was sort of a hodgepodge of commentary, but that's kind of some of the things I've been noticing out there.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question. As someone who is old and decrepit, I remember a time when Kentucky's General Assembly looked a whole lot like that bell-shaped curve. You certainly had very conservative folks, you had a few liberal folks, but you really had a bulk in the middle of Republicans and what yellow dog Democrats that represented that moderate version. We, I think as a state, have followed what Olympia Snowe talks about in Congress, which is a bimodal curve, where you're either here or you're either there, that there's literally nobody in the middle. What I often wonder about is the situation in Kentucky, is that landscape in Kentucky, is that Kentucky-centric? That really is because of factors within the Commonwealth, or it really emanates from Washington. I have a difficult time figuring out how important Washington is to Frankfurt lawmakers versus how much Scott referenced, how much they're just hearing in their counties, and that influences where they are. So Scott, you probably spend more time than anybody on this Zoom thinking nationally. As a Kentuckian who also looks at national issues, what do you see as that intersection between how Frankfurt looks? Is that coming from counties or Washington or everywhere?
Well, I think one thing that no state, Kentucky or any other, can escape is the absolute nationalization of all politics. And in the last, several years, I think it predated Trump to some degree, but it certainly accelerated during Trump. We have an absolute nationalization, and we sort of have sorted ourselves not based on local issues, but based on national lines. And I think we saw that driving, frankly, some of the turnout results in the 2016, 2018, and 2020 elections in Kentucky. We just have an absolute nationalization of politics. Average ordinary people are more apt to judge their own space in the political spectrum by how they feel about Trump or how they feel about Biden than they are about how they feel about what the General Assembly did yesterday. I also think we're undergoing a rapid democratization of the business of politics, unlike we've ever seen. More people have the ability to directly organize themselves and to communicate with their politicians than they've ever had before. And I don't mean just by the process of voting. I mean by talking to each other and then organizing and for the purpose of having influence on the legislature and on their other elected officials. So I think all of that means that state officials are hearing more from people who are less apt to know exactly what's going on in Frankfurt, but they are likely to know exactly how they feel about the cultural issues that are driving the national conversation. I actually think we've come to a place now where the two parties are almost less partisan and more cultural. And I think we're certainly seeing that play out in Congress even today as the House Republicans try to decide what to do with the conspiracy theorist Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, what she is saying has nothing to do with being a conservative, but it has everything to do with being, aggressively and unrepentantly ignorant or stupid. so I think the drawing of these cultural lines is more definitive for more of our population than we sometimes want to admit. A lot of people still analyze this as the conservatives versus the liberals, but I'm not so sure it's that clean of an analysis anymore.
Yeah. Lawrence, what about you? You in normal times, you're walking the halls of Frankfurt all the time. Based on what you're hearing, what are the drivers on how lawmakers and the governor are operating?
Well, if you think about it, Kentucky is generally a conservative state, except for pretty much the urban areas. Kentucky tends to vote conservative. But there used to be lots of conservative Democrats, particularly in the state house and to some extent in the state senate. You saw a lot less of that. You saw in this last election, for example, a lot of those conservative Democrats were replaced by Republicans. So there is more of each person going to his or her corner than there used to be, and fewer people in the middle. So I think we are seeing a separation, a more stark separation, and as Scott said, a nationalization of local politics. I look at 2016, for example, Mitch McConnell essentially ran against Barack Obama. And you're seeing even in state senate races when they are advertising, they will mention Nancy Pelosi or Joe Biden or a national figure to say, I'm for that person or opposed to that person. So I think you are seeing more of a nationalization and more separation between the two houses, the House and Senate. And I think Scott's right, it is more of a cultural thing.
Linda?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with both of them. I think Kentucky in particular plays out this urban-rural divide that we see in these pretty liberal blue islands of Lexington and Louisville. And maybe someday as we continue to lose our rural population, that will even itself out, but it certainly hasn't now. I think we don't want to forget about the history of political parties and how what used to be a conservative Democrat is certainly a Republican now. I mean, the Dixiecrats it's a complete swap. And so I think that's playing into it too, but I agree that it's this, it's about how we're feeling as opposed to what we know and how we're feeling about issues that maybe don't even affect us. Because as we see over and over again, people seem to get very worked up about issues that actually have nothing to do with them necessarily. And yet they feel very strongly. I mean, there was just a mind-blowing headline, I guess today or yesterday, that a lot of the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th hadn't voted in 2020. I mean, that's crazy. And I think we will see, I think we are seeing in Kentucky that we have that Marjorie Taylor wing here in Kentucky. They're very loud. Whether they will become as important to the Republican Party in Kentucky as they are nationally, I think is yet to be seen. And how the kind of establishment Republicans deal with it here will be an interesting bellwether.
Okay. I have one final question because Bill Goodman has demanded equal time for his segment. So as we at KYA have begun thinking more and more about schools and reopening, I've kind of gotten back into thinking about kids' cognitive development. I found an interesting data point that Rolf Smith has a seminal research piece out where he suggests that the average kid who's 10 or 12 years old asks about 125 probing questions a day. That's why moms, dads, and grandparents go a little goofy with kids. But that adults only ask 6 probing questions a day. So I'm going to use up one of your 6 questions right now. And what I wonder is that right now, as we sit, a couple days in from reconvening, short session, but still a long way to go. What if you could ask either President Stivers or Speaker Osborne or the governor, if you could ask one question that you're really wondering about in terms of the outcome of this session, what would that question be? So I'll give you just a second to think, and then why don't you all just jump in, instead of me calling on you when you got your question. So what's the big question mark that you have in your mind that you're wondering about as you look ahead at this session?
I guess my big question to the leadership would be, what are you doing to move Kentucky forward when it continues to lag so far behind in so many areas, not just children, but healthcare and educational attainment and death, cancer rates, environmental degradation? What is actually happening? I mean, because I do feel that sometimes these cultural issues are taking the place of substantive ones. And so that would be my question.
Okay.
There's a question I actually asked Speaker Osborne yesterday when I interviewed him,
Yep.
looking at the moves that have been made, to kind of strip the governor of some of his power. And Speaker Osborne also has a proposed constitutional amendment out there that would give the legislature more flexibility in when it meets. And I asked him, is Kentucky moving toward a full-time legislature? And he said, no, I hope not. But at the same time, it seems like they are. They're moving toward a more full-time legislature. And they almost have to be if these laws that they pass do stand in court. And we encounter another long-term emergency like the pandemic, the legislature is going to have to almost be there all the time. So I wonder if Kentucky is slowly moving toward a more full-time legislature.
That's interesting. Scott?
I think I would just like to know if they have been thinking at all about what we are going to do about the untold amounts of damage that I think has been done to kids over the last calendar year. Being out of school, malnutrition. Linda mentioned the abuse issue. It's only, we know empirically it's gotten worse during the
Exacerbated.
And so I think the ripple effects of the damage that have been done to kids over the last year will be felt for a long time. And my question is, are we prepared to do anything about it now, to deal with that over the next several years? Because I worry how many kids have we lost over the last year that will be hard to reel in and make them, the kinds of Kentucky citizens we want them to be as they grow up.
That's a good point that Scott makes. That we're doing lots of stories on the spiraling homicide rate in Louisville, and I think it's all tied to what Scott just said.
Yeah, I agree with you.
That's a profound issue. Well, I want to hit the pause button and pivot to my good friend Bill Goodman. I cannot imagine anybody watching this who doesn't know Bill as the longtime host of Kentucky Tonight. Bill also wears a journalism professor hat at Transy. Has also taught at the Center on Rural Journalism at UK, and currently heads up the Kentucky Council for the Humanities. Bill, the respect I have for you and the affection, so I so appreciate you being part of it. I'm going to pivot to you, and Bill is going to sort of handle the second half of this forum, and also lead to the end of it. So Bill, take it away. Thanks for being here.
Thanks very much, Terry. I appreciate it, and I appreciate my friends and colleagues being on the Zoom with us today. I told you that I will hesitate to plug my Think Humanities podcast, or to open by saying this is Think History. I'm Bill Goodman, which is a segment I do on WEKU NPR radio every day, and I can send you those time slots and the content if you'd like. But I would like to put the journalism hat back on, and I certainly won't treat you as some of the students in my first class at Transylvania last semester in the first module that we were teaching remotely, when one young man, very bright, one of my best students in class, said that, and this is sort of a startup question that I ask all of them, what is your news source? And he was the only one brave enough and bold enough to say Snapchat. And I knew right then that the semester was going to be a challenge. But hopefully they knew a little bit more about journalism at the end of the semester. So I want to start with an overall sort of a 50,000 foot view and let you philosophize about some of these issues, and then we'll drill down on what we're finding in Kentucky too. Paraphrasing a recent report that the Aspen Institute put out on trust in journalism, said that at its best, and you all know this, journalism informs the public on matters of civic concern, gives citizens a common set of facts, provides a context that leads to understanding of stories, helps us all to understand others who are different from ourselves and how we can get to know them a little bit better. Of course, that's the ideal. What the Aspen Institute and many others have been thinking about for several years is the reality is much more complicated and problematic. The news media, as you know, has lost the trust of many, many Americans. Republicans generally see the mainstream media as deeply biased. Democrats are a little bit more trustful, but not much. Independents, as you all know, find themselves somewhere in the middle, but continually skeptical. So talk to me a little bit about trust. And has the public really lost trust in the media? And if so, why? Linda, why don't you begin?
Great. Man, I mean, you know, we only have a half an hour for this, my God. I mean, I think that this cultural polarization that we've been talking about has certainly affected the media. And I think, and I hate to bring up this word because we've avoided it so far, but Trump has changed the media because the old model didn't work anymore, because you had to, I mean, the idea that the Washington Post would call the president say the president is lying is pretty amazing if you think about it. But he changed everything, and so this idea of, you know, equal both sides. Well, if one side is lying and the other side is not, it's hard to be totally equal in both presentations of those facts. And then he also has, in just 4 years, this idea of alternate facts, alternate reality. It's quite incredible, I think, how much that has done to undermine all media. And it is, I don't know where we go, because basically if there's two sets of facts if people think that whatever they feel is what it is, then we really are in deep trouble. And I think part of it is we get back to this education issue. I mean, I really don't know where to go from here. I'm pretty pessimistic and depressed about the whole situation.
Scott, did the media in 2016, 2017, did they allow President Trump to get away with too much, or they didn't know what to expect right at the beginning and it just continued to snowball from there? I mean, it was early on in his 4 years that he labeled the media the enemy of the people. That happened very early in his tenure. Did the media allow that to happen?
You know, I'm going to go back 20 years. I've been part of conservative Republican politics since I left the media in 2000. And I've gone to a lot of Republican events, a lot of Republican Lincoln Day dinners, and been around a lot of Republicans in my last 2 decades. And the topic that came up from the start of my tenure to now, more often than any other topic, was what are we going to do about the media? So this idea that sort of distrust in the media and that this is all sort of new is false. I mean, this sentiment has been around for a long time, and Trump did not invent it. He, however, was smart enough, if you want to call it that, to reflect it. He was the first, Republican presidential candidate to come on and use it as a cudgel, to win an election. And he came along at just the right time. I mean, there was a rising sort of sense that the elites had let us down. He knew that the Republican base was spoiling for a fight with the media and the elites. And then he got to run against the exact correct person, Hillary Clinton, to pull off that gambit. But I have to tell you, this has been out there for a long time. The idea that Republicans just can't get a fair shake from, the media, whether it's national or whatever. And so it didn't surprise me how much his message on that resonated and continues to resonate. I mean, it's one of the reasons that people doing aggressively stupid things continue to retain support, because some Republicans will look at a situation and say, I don't really know what's going on here, but if the media is attacking that person, then I am going to defend that person because the media must be incorrect. That's how badly the trust has been damaged. They don't bother to sort out the facts of a situation. They just, where is this person vis-a-vis the media? I'll be on their side. And so I don't think, look, I think the press hated, obviously, I think they hated the fact that Donald Trump won. They did not expect him to win. In some ways, many media outlets, even Morning Joe, who hates Donald Trump more than anybody, they cheerleaded Donald Trump all the way through the thing until he got elected, and they were surprised. And I think people aren't stupid. They pick up on this. And I think that sort of thing destroys trust in media outlets as much as anything. So I think this industry has a tremendous amount of work to do. Not that absolves Donald Trump of anything he does or did. It certainly doesn't. Doesn't absolve any of us or any political actor. But any industry that's trying to regain trust has to do some self-reflection of how did we get here? How is it that over half the country doesn't trust us? So I think at the same time, we have to hold the political actors accountable. I think we're going to have to hold the industry accountable for where it has wound up today.
Lawrence, you get to weigh in and offer your thoughts, but also to, if you will, analyze what Linda and Scott both said. Scott said that the media attacked Donald Trump. Linda said that she didn't know what was next, that journalism will still be here, but what form will it be in and how will it change and how quickly will it happen? So in the original question, has the public lost trust in the media? Do we have to define who the public is? Is it that defined? And the second part of the question is, who are the media we're talking about? Are we talking about, it's so trite today to use mainstream media, but we all know that there's a left and a right. And when Scott says the media attacked the president, were they attacking or were they reporting what had happened accurately?
It depends on your. I think they're both right. It depends on your perspective that you're watching from. I'm no expert in national media. I mean, I grew up in a time when there were 3 networks, and they all kind of said the same thing. And at one time, there was a kind of a national consensus about what the truth was. And as the media has fractured into different corners, I think whether it caused it or was a result of it, so has society kind of fractured into different cultures. I am more concerned with what we do in the local media. That is my concern. And there, what I see in the local media is not so much, although we get some bleed down from people upset with the national media, it comes down to us. But the problem in the local media is more the economics of it than anything else. My concern is we at one time had 3 and then 4 really strong, powerful news entities, TV stations, plus a strong newspaper, the Courier-Journal and the Louisville Times, providing information for us. Now the Times is gone, the Courier-Journal is reduced, as is the Herald-Leader, unfortunately. And you have, I think, 2 fairly strong TV stations, ours and the CBS station, and 2 others that are weaker. So I think the economics of broadcasting in particular, and media in general, local media, is the problem. Trying to make the revenue model work so that you can have the reporters and the editors and the photographers and the people on the ground to be in Frankfurt or to be in Eastern Kentucky or to be wherever and do the reporting. That's what I see as the big problem.
Can I add to what Lawrence is saying? I mean, I think that it is crucial that this argument, and I would say that there are ways to link the erosion of local media to kind of this wild place that we live in of alternative facts. I mean, the Herald-Leader used to have bureaus in at least 8 different cities in Eastern Kentucky and across the whole and Central Kentucky. And we have 1. No, maybe 2. I guess we have someone in Pikeville. And you just can't cover everything that is going on. And that is a loss to the entire state. And frankly, it's a loss to democracy. And the idea of democratic norms, the idea of the separation of powers, the idea of the electoral process that people seem to think doesn't matter anymore, as we've just witnessed. And it is really, I believe, the erosion of local media is harming our democracy. And I don't, the national media, that's probably Scott's bailiwick. I don't really know. I think they've done very well economically out of Trump. And it'll be interesting to see what happens now that he's gone.
Scott, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I do think there's a huge difference between local and national. I think the national guys, I mean, look, they're businesses. I mean, and they're running a business designed to drive as many eyeballs or clicks as possible. And when they do, as Linda just said, they do well economically. I mean, there's no doubt Trump was a huge benefit to cable news, and I think the New York Times and the Washington Post have more subscribers than ever. I mean, this, who knew all we needed to fix voter turnout and the media business in terms of economics was Donald Trump. I mean, this guy has driven more people to vote and buy newspaper subscriptions than anybody in human history. But what they're doing, I think, is they're in many ways catering to an audience. I mean, the people at Fox News, I don't think, are under any illusion that they're going to put anything on the air today that's going to attract someone to migrate from MSNBC over to Fox, and vice versa. That's not. They're not talking to the same group of people. And so ultimately what you end up with are groups of Americans having only conversations with themselves or with people who confirm their priors. And then over time, they have no idea how to talk to each other. So they begin to distrust each other. They begin to hate each other. And then they begin to believe that, hey, maybe that group stole the election from me. Let's go storm the Capitol. I mean, this is sort of the cascading impact of the siloing of Americans from each other in an information age. And I think this doesn't happen as much at the local level. And I agree with what's been said about the fact that we need more, we could use more local media outlets. I do think local media outlets, though, I think they should examine, though, what audience are they catering to? I mean, I will say this about all journalism. I think the worst thing that ever happened to anyone was Twitter. Giving these journalists Twitter accounts was the worst thing that ever happened to this industry, because
well, to all of you, then
they say things before they know what's happening, and then they frequently let their slip is showing a little bit when it comes to their own personal politics, and this drives mistrust. But I generally agree that more local coverage of things happening would be better.
Well, to all of you, then, if Linda is so frustrated that she doesn't know what's going to happen. You spelled out that it sounds like going forward, Scott, we're going to have the same news media and polarization of journalism, and the tribes that are going to be attracted to each Lawrence, you're more concerned about, and I agree with you, local journalism has always been where it is and where it should be. But at the same time, frankly, I don't know how television stations are doing. I can tell you that local news outlets seem to be selling spots all the way through their 6 o'clock and 5 o'clock, now 4 o'clock and soon to be 3:30 broadcast. I mean, and they're not lacking for any revenue. Newspapers are different source altogether. Linda, you can't help digitally either look at the Herald-Leader or the Courier-Journal, or you don't see it nationally, to see that they're not the reporters that the number of reporters that were there at one time. That frankly, it's disconcerting at times, frustrating as a former journalist to see the same lead story that I've read on maybe Friday evening, on Saturday, and then repeated on Sunday, and sometimes it ends up back in there on Monday without any update. I mean, that's just the way it is. You don't have enough people out there. So where do we go from here?
What version?
Where do we go from here? I mean, is it? I know as journalists and as followers and as teachers, I have kids that ask me now at Transy, Mr. Goodman, Dr. Goodman, Professor Goodman, should I go into journalism? I really like this class. What should I do next? It's a tough question to answer sometimes. So where do we go from here, locally and nationally? Is it going to be the same old, same old?
Do you want me to start? Like I said, I do not know. I mean, I think in some ways there has been a democratization of journalism with Twitter. I mean, for all of Twitter's problems, which I completely agree with, it does give people voices that didn't have them. We aren't just the voice of God from the New York Times anymore. There's so many sources and so many people writing and so many people doing good work. And I wonder if it'll end up in some kind of Substack world where everybody's on a newsletter, and then you can pick and choose from what you want. The economics, though, are not at all clear, and so it is not. I'm not optimistic about the future of newspapers for sure, and whether they can then make the transition to digital media as digital media companies, and with the same resources to hire trained professionals who know how to do journalism. So when you ask that, when people ask me that too, should I go into journalism? I'm like, well, it's bigger. There's more opportunities in some ways than ever before, and it's needed in many ways. But what the business model is I would say unclear to anyone.
And about I agree with what Linda said about Twitter kind of democratizing the space, but the problem is that we're encountering is that on Twitter and Facebook, other social media, people can't always discern what's legitimate and what's not. That's part of the problem. Is you have these illegitimate sources, I call them, who put intentionally false information out there, side by side with journalists who are doing the work of real journalism, and people often can't tell them apart and don't know who to believe. So I think that's a lot of the problem.
Scott, how can we be more aware of going forward, starting now, that opinion is clearly labeled as opinion, and that partisan commentators are distinguished, are separated from the news? Or will we never ever get back to that?
Well, I'm going to disagree with the premise of your question, which I think is that opinion is wrong or bad. I mean, I write.
Where is it wrong or bad? In a newscast, in a news story, opinion is bad or good?
No, I don't have a problem with opinion commentators being part of newspapers or TV stations or anything else. Obviously, I am one. So is Linda. And I don't want to speak for Linda, but I'm sure this is true because it's true for me. Every single thing I write and every single thing I say is aggressively fact checked before it reaches a newspaper or the air. And it's fact checked by me as a professional and by other people. And so just because I have a point of view doesn't mean what I'm saying is false. It just means I have a point of view and I'm using facts, accepted facts, and an accepted set of information to underscore a point I want to make from my point of view. Same for Linda. You know, she's using accepted facts to make her points. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think what Lawrence said is actually the worst scourge on the entire ecosystem. And that is there are people who are aggressively making things up and then spewing them throughout the system. And then that's confusing. So if I say something as an opinion commentator, it doesn't make it false. If Linda does, it doesn't make it false. But there are people who out there say false things for the purpose of attracting audience and attention. So I think opinion journalism has actually been unfairly maligned. We need opinion journalists. We need columnists. We need people who are willing to say, here's my point of view and why I think it's right. We need civil political discourse, which is what that is. And if you try to aggressively eliminate civil discourse, what little is left, then I think you will regret that. So that's my view on the separation of news and opinion. I think people should be allowed to talk about the news because it's what our democracy requires.
I think ultimately, you know, it's up to individual reporters, individual outlets. All I can be responsible for ultimately is me. And I think I need as a journalist, and I'm different from Scott, who's a commentator, and Linda, who's a columnist. As a journalist, I have to be as meticulous and as fair as I can possibly be. And over time, and do it consistently over time so that you gain the trust of the people that you work with and work for. One of the best things anybody ever said about me was they told my boss, they said, I can't tell what his political views are. And I said, great, that's what I want. I don't want people to know what I think politically, but as long as they look at my stories and what I do and say, you know, that's pretty balanced, that's pretty fair. He treated this guy fairly, even though he was tough on him. If we can do that, continue to do that over time, then you gain credibility, your outlet gains credibility, and I can't talk for the entire media, but I think that's how we gain credibility.
Let's wrap up this way, and I will turn it back over to Terry in just a minute because I know he's probably wants to add a couple of cents to the conversation. But let me try to ask you to, although I'm going to pull this number on that they do on Scott on NPR, where they ask a long, involved question and give you a minute to respond, but as concise as you can. Scott did mention that during the pandemic, we've been faced with some horrific problems dealing with children, and he named those depression and mental anguish, and leaving a lasting effect. Child abuse. Linda mentioned that story doesn't get nearly the ink that it should, and the problem that we have in Kentucky. Lawrence covers that and is trying to do his best to bring that message. Of course, Kentucky Youth Advocates and their partnership with COSAIR and the Face It movement to rid Kentucky of child abuse by 2023. We play at Kentucky Humanities a very small part in that, but we try to do our best. So the last question, as far as journalism and coverage of that story, that's the way, when I was growing up in journalism and news reporting, that's the way we attacked these ills. We covered them and tried to do our best job with those. So just to ask you, Lawrence, let me start with you. What's the best way journalism can effectively deal with the child abuse problem and move Kentucky off the dime from where it's been for decades and really do some good?
The answer it always is shine a light on it. Folks like Linda, Debbie Eder at the Courier-Journal have done phenomenal work in that area. We've done stories on it. Throwing light on it, reporting it, exposing it is really the best we can do to try to end that. We can't change people's hearts, but we can certainly bring their attention to it and prompt legislators to then take some action and try to mitigate the problem. But our job is to expose it, throw a light on it, and then see that we hold people accountable to say what they said they're going to do about it.
Linda?
Yeah, boy, I have a lot to say about this topic. I agree with Lawrence that you've got to shine the light. And then I agree with Scott, you need opinion writers to say, this is what we need to focus on instead of who's really in charge in Frankfurt. We've got to focus on these substantive issues. And I want to say something about the Child Fatality Review Board. If the Courier-Journal and the Herald-Leader had not gone to court for about, 3 years, we wouldn't know about that. About how bad the problem was in Kentucky, because the government was trying to keep it a secret because they didn't want it out there. And there were hundreds of thousands of dollars in lawyers' fees that neither paper can really afford anymore. So it's just another, another problem with the erosion of local news.
Scott, your answer in 10 seconds. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
Yeah. I think I think we all, commentators, journalists, any media person, we all have a role to play in this. And it all revolves around asking questions. Lawrence is going to ask certain kinds of questions from his perch as a nonpartisan journalist. But Linda and I are also going to aggressively ask questions with our points of view. And it doesn't mean we're always going to agree on whether the answers were sufficient or the correct answers, but I suspect she and I might have a lot of the same questions to start, and then information can flow from there. And so I think we all have a role to play. I also think for people in the political sphere, these issues have to be raised in campaigns. Campaigns tend to be where we litigate, the things that we're most upset about. And what was the main issue in the 2020 election? Coronavirus. It's the thing we're most upset about because it's hurting America. So in 2023, in the governor's race, I would anticipate that child welfare issues, the ones that were pre-existing and the ones stemming from the pandemic, could become a major issue. So I think while we're asking questions of government in the short term and in the now term, I think when we begin to cover this governor's race that'll start here pretty soon, we have to aggressively demand from these campaigns political answers to these questions. Bashir will have to defend his record. Whichever Republican runs will have to have an alternate view or their plans. But the role of local journalism in this is to not let the campaigns necessarily devolve into a nationalized finger pointing, but instead actually drive local answers. I don't think there's near enough coverage of local elections, governor on down. I think we get a little bit, but we don't get near enough. And I recognize it's not the sexiest thing in the world to put on television, and it's hard to cover sometimes, but there just isn't as much coverage of these campaigns as there ought to be. And when you consider how much power the governor currently wields, or the legislature may wield here in the near future, we need to be more aggressively questioning the people who are running.
Dr. Brooks.
Hey, Bill, thank you so much. And Scott, Linda, and Lawrence, thank you so much. I'm really humbled that you gave Children's Advocacy Week your time and thoughtfulness today. To all of you who joined today, I would be remiss if I didn't remind you that the issues that you heard discussed, especially that last one about abuse and neglect, there are policy proposals on the table. There are policy proposals on the Blueprint for Kentucky's Kids to tackle that very issue around abuse and neglect. There are legislative proposals and there are budget priorities that need to happen. So as important as this discussion was around journalism, I want to remind you that if what you heard Scott and Linda and Lawrence and Bill raise today, if that echoed in your heart or echoed in your brain, go to the blueprint, make sure you get informed of the facts that Scott referenced, and then make that call. Make that call to the governor, make that call to Senate and House leadership, make that call to your senator and your representative, and say to them, we're watching what you do around abuse and neglect, and there's no cop-out. There's no other issue that you can defer to. We want to see action. That is the best way in the world to end today. We hope you'll go to our website and continue to monitor the many, many events associated with Children's Advocacy Week. Thanks for joining us. And again, Lawrence, Linda, Scott, and Bill, thanks a million. We appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.